Andrew, it is a pleasure to talk to you. It's been we've been chatting a little bit about this in advance to try to organize. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone out there that if you're listening via audio on the main engine cutoff feed, there's a video version of this over on the Precious Payload YouTube channel. So we'll have a link in the show notes for that. I just want to get that out there in case I know there's a lot of people that prefer video. Maybe they want to see us. Maybe we'll show some stuff as we go. So I just wanted to put that out there at first. But how is it going today there, Andrew?
It's doing fantastic. It's a pleasure to be talking to you live here. And yeah, I've been a fan of the show, been sharing it among all my friends and peers and colleagues for the last couple of years. And yeah, huge supporter of the MECO and the community I've got in Discord.
Yeah, I remember I was thinking about this. I think it was when you launched the company that you posted something in Discord years ago. And so it's cool to see you come along this way and like be able to track what you've been working on these years. So, and It sounds like you're getting to a very, very cool time in the company's lifespan here. So let's start with like, what is Precious Payload? How did it begin? What was your inspiration to start this kind of business? And what is it that you're bringing to the market overall?
Oh yeah, sure. I just noticed that it's been 5 years since we started working on the concept and the company. So yeah, it's been a long time. What Precious Payload is today is we're building this set of developer tools for the space industry, similar to, you can call it like AWS for space. What we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce the complexity of the space industry to empower the non-space companies, non-space people to start leveraging space infrastructure to solve the problems in their businesses, to solve problems here on Earth. And yeah, just again, to quote our sort of mutual friends, to bring the space down to Earth to everyday people. Yeah, this is exactly what we do.
The way that you put it there, that you're trying to bring, the non-space types into the space industry, that seems to be a little bit of a theme in the industry. Blue Origin, when they announced Orbital Reef, their commercial space station project, they very much had a similar tone there, where they're looking for people that haven't yet really taken full advantage of the space industry today, and they're trying to partner with people that might not have all of like the vested knowledge that you need to be able to pull off a complex space mission, and then fill in the gaps of what they're working on in the realm of human spaceflight. For the side of the industry that you're focused on, is it that you found through your experience that there's just too much specialized knowledge that you need to be able to like complete the architecture of a mission? What are the gaps there that you're trying to fill in for somebody that has not approached the space industry before?
I think what all these companies get excited about is like how to build even more infrastructure, how to build, more rockets, more custom buses for satellites, more propulsion modules. And I think while it's great, it doesn't like really excite people and doesn't inspire like new founders to go and try to tinker, with the satellite technology to solve the problems of agricultural companies, mining companies, or aviation companies. And I think like the idea they have in mind is that, if you look at the last, let's say, 40 years of technology innovation per se, and like if you know this concept of tech waves, right? We had like dawn of personal computing, then we have dawn on internet, then we have mobile. Now they're thinking like, what's the next big tech wave? Is it metaverse? Is it Web3, crypto, or something else? So what I'm thinking is that if we all in the space industry, if we're all trying to make space the next tech wave, so, that's really like the whole humanity, not like just Silicon Valley, would get excited about, so excited that every small, medium enterprise, every SME will have a satellite or a payload in space. That's what I want to see. Like, I want really like in the same fashion that today, just every business has the online presence. You cannot run the business without the online presence. I want to bring the business of space to the state where, like, yes, of course, it makes sense for your corporation to have their own satellite or at least have some lease capacity on the existing satellites, right? So, and the question I have is if the common ground that we need to bring space to that level, right? So what the user experience should be like, right? If like in a PC era, you had, Visual Basic, right? You had some basic stuff that would let you start tinkering just from a dorm room, right? If same can be done with like, I don't know, Coinbase, you get a Coinbase and you start trading crypto and like doing some stuff on Ethereum, right? Like what is it that simple tool that brings you very close to the space industry? So that's kind of what we want to bring to the people, rather than saying, hey, like, there's another space station that's going to be built in the next 10 years and you can play with it, if you can afford it, maybe sometime in the future. Yeah.
What's interesting is that a lot of the industry has been very focused on launch the past 10 years, right? That's where a lot of the money has been flowing. That's where a lot of the attention has been, of like, let's get people to space cheaper. And there hasn't been a ton of companies that have focused outside of their own business model on enabling what actually happens once you get off the launch vehicle, right? Like, great, we've spent a lot of energy focused on the first 8 minutes of getting to the thing. And it's, you're in orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. So that is a very large part of what it takes to do business in space. But if everyone continues to focus solely on launch, there won't be a lot of things to do with those launch vehicles. I think the pertinent side here is to talk a little bit about the launch aggregators, the rideshare businesses that have been cropping up, Spaceflight, and now there's a bunch of others. SpaceX has gotten into it directly, that have focused on getting smaller payloads to space. Are there things that, I don't know if you've experienced working with those kind of companies before, but they tend to do a lot of like mission management for a customer. But what are the things that they're missing out there that you see an opening for, the precious payload to handle some other parts of the business? What is it that they're missing in focusing on your mission management from a launch perspective?
I think that they're not, like, they do a great job, all of them, of providing the best services out there for exactly, like dropping you off at the desired point in space on orbit. And they do a lot of value add services that we refer to as mission management, with the primary goal of making sure that you don't cause any problems on the launch pad, right? So they say, hey, like, of course we're going to help you. Of course we're going to help you, define the necessary hardware for attaching your satellite to the upper stage of launch vehicle. Of course, we're going to help you with documents. But why we're doing that is because we want you to be as compliant as possible with our regulators. So we don't experience the problems where we are like aggregating all these dozens of satellites from around the world. We don't want to have any problems, because otherwise it's going to cause delay or cancellation of the entire flight. And, we've seen it many times, right? But the real question here is that I would say that when you work, when a customer or when a satellite mission or the satellite team work on a satellite, they look into access to space as the problem they're trying to solve. Like, my favorite thing that I do with the customers, I talk them out of actually launching a satellite or building a satellite, because I feel that a lot of, like, majority of the companies that enter the space industry with their ideas of launching payloads, they get so excited and entrenched in this valley of, hey, like, we'll have our own satellite on orbit. Let's do that. Let's figure it out. Let's get on a SpaceX rocket so we can do a PR release that Elon Musk is, sending our payload to space. This is like literally, I'm actually quoting not even one customer's, sorry. Yeah, and actually do that. And my favorite thing to do is that, I ask them, why do you need that? Like, what are you trying to achieve, right? If the answer is, hey, like, we're there to just increase the technology readiness level of our payloads, I always find a way to make sure that they know the options. And so if I can talk them out from building the satellite and say, hey, like, you can just either host your sensor on someone else's payload, or you can, again, it's been the case, multiple cases with our clients, you can just launch in a suborbital rocket. You will get exposure to space environment for dozens of minutes. You'll get all the pictures you want. You'll get the data, and hey, the best part, you'll get your payload back. You'll get your entire system back on the parachute safely, and you can relaunch it again. So I think, like, for me, the concept of mission management is not just, hey, let's get you on the rocket and make sure that you've got your compliance, etc. It's rather, hey, let's look at the business case. Let's look at the business objectives. Let's talk to your end customer. Like, why you even want to send this camera to space? What does your customer want? And then walking backwards from the end user, because that's what I care. I think that the space economy would be sustainable only if we start working backwards from the end user requirements and not just get too excited about just launching satellites and building better rockets. So yeah, I call the mission management when you, as a startup, you go and talk to the end users, you work backwards from their problems, and then you decompose that into the task orders for the space industry, if and when it makes sense. So yeah, it's a long answer to the short question. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean it's an interesting take that it's more about the strategy leading up to any particular component of the mission, right? Because launch is just one part of it. You've got ground systems and ground controls that you need. You've got actually managing the data that's coming out of your payload is a big part of it as well. And we've talked about this on a couple of shows that it's great that Planet has so many satellites, but they also, and they're taking, I don't even know how many photos they take a day of Earth, but they also need to be able to deal with that amount of data and make sense of it and then get it to customers. So there's a lot more than just, overly focusing on the engineering of the particular payload, which is always a tough thing, right? Because for us space nerds, a lot of us got interested in the industry by nerding out on low-level engineering details. But when you look at it from a business level, there's so many different components that you need to get right. And the ground control one, I'm interested to pick your brain on a bit because over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of new entrants into that ground control market where you've got companies like Amazon Web Services getting into that. There's ones that are specifically focused, like KSAT, that were kind of built out with that idea in mind. It's when you look at the websites for these things as somebody who isn't well versed in that kind of system, it's hard to really sense like why it is that those things are important and how it hooks in with your mission. So and it's, I can tell, something that if you're coming into the space industry and you haven't really interacted with it before, you might not even think about that aspect of getting your data down to the ground. So how do you look at that side of the industry? What is it that you're teaching your customers about when it comes to the ground systems?
Sure. So I think you already said that. Like, this is exactly what happens with the majority of the customers that work in their first mission. They just forget that ground segment and providing the connectivity for tasking your satellite, controlling your satellite, and also downloading data is actually why you send something to space. Like, you're not sending something to space to leave it there. You are sending it there so you can control it and beam down the data. And data is your goal of the mission, regardless of the nature of the mission. Like, you can launch your new innovation propulsion system, but you just need data from it to understand whether it did perform as expected or not, right? And to make it even worse, like, what happens with 90% of the customers we talk to who are working on their first mission, they're just doing, this common waterfall approach, right? They say, all right, what do we got here? Like, let's do some plan, like a project plan, right? Then let's go and find the launch, because why not? Launch, we can do a lot of PR about launch, securing the launch and getting into SpaceX, why not? And then once they secure the launch, you say, okay, what's next in the project? And they go and start looking at the ground station segments. And I would say in at least half of the cases, all these beautiful companies, there's KSAT and Amazon, RBC Signals, and the others, they're going to say, hey, like, you should have talked to us earlier, because yes, like, congratulations that you've got your launch, but we either don't have the antennas to support that orbit, and or you need to reconfigure your entire communication subsystem on a satellite to make it happen. So we wish you've talked to us at the beginning. And that's where what needs to be happening is, you and I were both in the software industry, so just take agile approach, right? Where you say, all right, like, can we do like both? Like, can we sort of go and instead of going waterfall, can we just get the launch options, show it to the rest of the community of the, let's say, ground stations, and bring them both data sets saying, okay, here's my satellite project, here's my communication subsystem, this is my desired orbits, and those are the launch options that I've got from like different launch providers. Can you help me understand what will be the scenarios if I pick the like launch option A versus launch option B? Because that's the input from the ground station providers is really important at that stage. And that also works with the rest of the like building blocks, the primitives of the space mission, because in order to make your mission faster and reduce the time it costs and increase the velocity of missions, you need to be able to make it a flexible equation. Like, it has to be like you simultaneously need to be able to just, lay the cards on the table and say, tell me what's possible, what's not. And then you reshuffle the cards and then you like optimize your route to space. This is, I feel, what needs to be happening. And yeah, this is exactly what we are building for the ground station community as well.
It's interesting to think about that as like the fact that there are all those different variables that you need to consider to actually find the right mix. Because it could be that depending on what your ground control and ground station requirements are, it might make sense to get a more expensive launch that gets you in the right spot for what you actually need out of your mission, because it's going to save you money on the back end by having a better ground station setup. Or maybe it's just straight up like that's what you need to actually pull off the mission that you have in mind. And it's not as simple as finding the cheapest launch and finding the cheapest ground station and finding the cheapest components. If the whole mix overall doesn't check off the boxes of your business requirements. And I guess that's like, again, from the person that's coming into the industry, looking at these as parallel paths it makes sense to us in like every area of life, except when you get overly fixated on certain details.
Yeah.
And there's other things that you have listed on the site as well as areas that you're interested on. Insurance is one that I'm always curious when people start talking about insurance, because it is such an like a completely opaque side of the industry from people that aren't actually signing insurance deals. It is hard for me as somebody who digs into a lot of stuff to find details on specific insurance plans that are out there or insurance premiums that have been paid by different customers. And I know on the smaller side of the industry, there's different constraints because the amount that you're insuring is so small that these large companies might not even be interested in insuring something like that. So maybe can we talk a little bit about the insurance side and how that fits into the mission planning that you're working your customers through day to day?
So first of all, you're right that insurance is not very exciting topic. So it's definitely less exciting than, doing the PR with Elon Musk and everything. But again, from the standpoint of sustainability of the space economy and the commercialization of efforts of the space industry, it's like, it's one big pillar that protects the downsides of the investors and backers of the satellite technology companies and, terrestrial businesses that are trying to launch something into space. And that's in like having the proper insurance and proper downside protection. It's the tool that brings more money to the industry per se. And it brings more, I would say, sustainable money. So, there's a lot of investors who would say, hey, I legally, fiduciary, I cannot invest in something risky, right? So the insurance and placing the right insurance gets more missions to the community and brings more investors and more players eventually to the space industry. So I just wanted to underline the fact that it's really important, and it's not just, the paperwork that's mandatory for some missions, right? And as you rightly said, if you look at the new space as where all the bleeding edge technology measures are happening, like there's an aspect of it that's all this innovation happens with small satellites and these tiny CubeSats, right? And as you said, the sum insured, so like the insurance premiums on those small deals and small CubeSats are just not exciting for traditional insurance companies, insurance brokerage companies that got used to placing like multi-dozen million insurance placements for the geostationary satellites, right? Because their entire like ecosystem, has been working in this geostationary markets, and they experience healthy premiums and margins there, right? And that model just doesn't scale down to the CubeSats and small sats. And so our approach here is that we figured out that what actually prohibits the space insurance companies to work on small satellites and CubeSats is that they have to go through huge underwriting process and KYC process for every client that they have. So every individual university or startup has to go through the entire process. And that process takes months and just costs, again, hours and hours and days and weeks of consulting time of the insurance company, right? So after talking to, I would say, 5 or 6 main players in the space insurance market, we just figured that if you are being quite aggressive in like taking the risks on the company like ours, you can get to the point where the insurance community can do the underwriting once on Precious Payload as a company and say, hey, do we trust these guys enough so we can give them like a blank policy for a couple $1 million and give them the ability to just add their end customers to that policy, and we'll just close our eyes and say, okay, we trust the judgment of this intermediary enough, so they would just add their end customers, and let's see what happens, right? And that is only possible if you build the robust system in place that would collect all the data and basically fill in the long KYC list and technical analysis that this underwriter have. And they can say, hey, as long as at your best judgment, you feel like you ticked all the boxes. So if there's a claim, you can show us the entire data sets on the company. And as long as you believe that you collected everything and you underwrote the risk, of course, provided you have the proper licensing, then we're going to close our eyes and do whatever you want, right? And that's something that we've been working on for a number of months now. And I hope that, again, it's kind of a slow process, but I hope that that really will introduce the innovative insurance products for the small set community. And again, just bring more players and more funding to the industry.
I feel like a term that you should steal is that Precious Payload is an expertise aggregator, right? Because you've got expertise in all these different systems. So you're able to take the expertise that you have from looking at different components of a mission and reuse that data both to help customers make better decisions, but like you're saying, also share that expertise with the insurance side, who would have spent a lot of time trying to dig into every little detail, but they're outsourcing that expertise to you. And I find that the Venn diagram of the way that converges makes a lot more sense to my brain. That where you do have, we mentioned earlier the rideshare companies, they have expertise about what launch options are out there and how they take advantage of that to make sure that they can get their customers to the right vehicles. You have a wider view where it's like, but we want to be experts in so many different parts of the industry that we can help people make a very sensible, start to end business plan that includes sharing bits of that expertise to different pieces of the industry where it's needed. And I find that as somebody who, sure, if you're a giant company, you could hire enough experts to check off those boxes. You could hire a ground station expert, and you can hire an insurance expert, and you can hire, all these different components. But especially when you're starting out, or if you're a small company or an organization, there's just so many instances when you don't want to do that and you don't have the resourcing to even hire people like that. So that seems very attractive to me. And it's in that way, who do you look at in the industry as competitors in that environment?
Sure. I mean, there are, again, you already mentioned that there are a lot of companies that provide mission management services as a part of their core services. And I would say that not direct competitors because they're partners, but companies that have the same mission of, again, just bringing the space to non-space companies. They used to be called hosted payload companies. Now they refer to themselves as space as a service companies. In fact, if you go and look at the S1 filings of all these SPAC companies that went public in the last 18 months, they all, regardless where they started, be it satellites or launch vehicles, they all say, hey, we are ultimately becoming a space as a service company. We're tackling the space applications markets. They're all about that. And again, the difference is that they, when you flip the slides and look at the solution, they all say, hey, by the way, in order to get ourselves in the space application market, we just launch more rockets, we'll just launch more satellites, we'll just put more hardware to space, right? And that's their part of the deal, right? They will, as I said, they will do whatever makes sense to help the customer, just to make sure that the customer ships their hardware to their integration facility. They will get the customers hardware integrated in their hosted payloads in the clean room, and they will sell them proprietary hardware. They will sell them the genuine hours, and that's how they turn profit and make the margin, right? It's just different equation. Where I think that if the real problem and the mission is to bring customer experience, right, CX, customer experience, to the customers, to reduce the complexity of space, not increase the complexity, but reduce the complexity is the mission, then I believe you need to have sole focus on the software and sole focus on having the best expertise in the world on building the like B2B software that reduces the complexity of complex, I would say, transactions and complex interactions between the companies. And this is exactly what space industry is, and it's exactly what we are bringing on the table. So like sole focus on the customer experience using the best software. That's it.
Can you give us an idea for who your typical customers are these days? Whether or not you can name them specifically, but just talk about like what kind of companies that you find fit best with Precious Payload as an organization.
We just started publishing the case studies. So we got the approval from the clients to start sharing what we've been doing with them for the last 6 to 8 months. And so a couple of case studies already online on our website. But yeah, my favorite one is ResearchSat of Australia. That's why I'm excited about this company. First, they are funded by their customer, which is a very rare bird in the space industry. There's actually a company, they're doing the research for pharmaceutical industry, and they're studying how the space environment can influence the mutation of bacteria. And like, they need microgravity conditions, they need the exposure to space radiation, and they're just my favorite client because it's not a typical space company. It's, the terrestrial business, the pharmaceutical company has funded this company to do the space research, right? And this is amazing. I think we need more of this because yes, I really, really like working with the companies that are launching yet another propulsion module or yet another like super magnet to space. But I'm always trying to say, hey, like, how about the customers? Do you have, real deals? Have you talked to the customers recently, right? Did he still did you have the deposits from them? Like, why we're doing this, right? And research strategies is just saying, hey, like, we don't have any venture backers behind us. We just have a customer who has paid for space research. So yeah, that's my favorite one.
That's a cool one too, because you're right that like, I don't know, I find this with the ISS program a lot, that there's a lot of times when you read about the kind of research that's flying to the space station and most of it's run of the mill. And then every once in a while you're like, that's a company I never thought would do stuff in space, that are just exploring what the options are to even, I feel like a lot of people have not committed to their brains yet of like what kind of research is useful and possible when you have cheaper platforms. And the ISS had a lot of subsidized platforms to get payloads and experiments up to the ISS, specifically like the USS or the US National Lab portion of that. But I think it's still a high barrier right now. So, as costs tend to drop over time, they're not dropping as fast as a lot of people would like getting access to space. But that brings the barrier down for companies that are not traditional space companies to start thinking about it, start playing with the ideas, because if it's significantly less expensive to even take some of those projects on, they become a lot more interesting because maybe it's, a hobby fund that a company looks at and it's like, let's do some experiments here. Let's see what we can do in space. But that you knock a couple zeros off the price and it looks more interesting than it does today. I don't know a lot of companies that are going to be like, yeah, let's do some experiments for, $30 million. But if it's 3 million or 300,000, that looks a lot more interesting to a lot of people.
That's true. And yeah, by the way, Anthony, how old are you?
31. I don't have to think 31. About that for too long, but yeah.
Yeah. When did you get the internet connection to your home for the first time?
Oh man. I was young enough that I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it was definitely in the 90s.
In the 90s. When was the first time you published something on HTML? When was the first time you ever published some website online?
I'm going to say it was like 7th or 8th grade, I would say. So that's like 03 or 04.
Where did you host it?
Oh God, if I could remember that, I would have an incredible memory. I don't know, it was probably like AOL or something. Something like, I think you had AOL homepages back in the day. I think it was that.
Okay, fair enough. Because I still remember when it was 2001, and I still remember that I convinced my dad, who ran a business of selling and servicing the 3D printers. I convinced him, hey, Dad, like I don't really believe you should go to all these trade shows to find your customers. There's thing called internet. Let's do some e-commerce magic here, right? And I remember that, I convinced him that, you need to have a website. Let's, me and my friends, we'll just, do some coding and we'll put up this website. Customers will find you, et cetera, et cetera. And then he said, sure, yeah, let's do that. And I remember that, when you just want to get a simple web page online, what we've done is that you first go to your ISP and you ask them to give you this static IP address. Then they would lay like a separate cable to your home office. Then you go and buy the components to build the home server. Then you have hook it up to the backup power. Then you go and rip off some Windows Server and torrents because you cannot afford you cannot afford the license. So you go and scramble some software, like the old version, whatever. And then you install that software. Then you install this Apache web server, PHP server, SQL server, all separately. And you code them in the notepad, tinker with the settings. Then you go and I had these huge books called PHP coding, whatever. Then you learn to code PHP, HTML, CSS. And then after 6 or 8 months, you have this thing online. And yeah, it just sits under your table. And then, I remember this feeling that, you spend entire year just to get this MVP done. Hopefully and then by the way, then you go to the Google. Was it Google by that time or was it Alta Vista?
Alta Vista and Dogpile. Ask Jeeves probably was around.
Yes. And then you manually feed it page by page, saying oh yeah, right, this is home page.
Yeah, here's a page to index.
Yes, manually create the index of, and you feed it manually to the search engine. So I still remember that feeling, and this is what I feel about the space industry today. I feel that, all right, if I really get excited and I know that, hey, I want to put a sensor in space, it's gonna solve a lot of problems. We'll have new data sets. We can, I don't know, discover new mining deposits or have more data from the agricultural fields that we have, whatever. There's that excitement. But then people start just, saying, okay, where do I start? Where do I go? Right. So
yeah.
What do I need to do?
Slog through all these different, very expertise-ridden components.
And just not there. You don't have even, you don't even have that, you don't have this PHP, SQL, hardware, whatever.
You can't torrent a big part of a space mission. You can't do that today.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what frustrates me. I want, because I see all these passionate people around me, I support the community of 30, 40, 50 founders who are trying to get something in space, right? Use space to solve some problems that they see in their industries, but they just can't. The best advice I can give them that's, hey, go to the nearest conference, start there, travel there, get to know people. After 6 months, maybe it will start to make sense for you, maybe not. So that's the grim reality, and that's something that really, really frustrates me. And my favorite company in the space industry now is the company called SkyFi. Have you heard of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because what they do, they enable you they build the app on the iPhone, right? That enables you to task the satellite and just take pictures of where you are, like a wedding reception or of your future hiking spots. And just get the real satellites to take a picture for you and make it available on your iPhone. I think that's amazing. We need more tools like that to inspire people to do something in space. I just think that everything that we've talked so far will become totally different reality once Starship is going to be online. I just feel that even people inside the space community, they really underestimate how Starship is going to change the way we think about space. I think a lot of, not only other launch vehicles, but a lot of concepts will become obsolete the moment Starship gets online and starts soliciting the request for proposals for commercial operations. Yeah, it's just I just think that a lot of people underestimate the importance of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people overly focus on the cost in that equation and not necessarily the sheer amount of mass that thing would put into orbit and how that changes. Do you need to worry about every single gram that goes onto your satellite anymore?
Yeah.
Or can you make other trade-offs? And those trade-offs just aren't available right now because it does cost so much. Because even to SpaceX credit, Falcon 9 is a much more affordable launch vehicle than most of the industry, but it's not a magnitude different yet, right? It's cheaper, but it's not knocking zeros off the price. So
Yeah.
some of the changes that I think there was hope that SpaceX would bring to the industry haven't quite materialized yet because there's still too many zeros there. And so you couple a very significant cost decrease plus
Yeah.
being able to trade more mass for other capabilities. And that mix is something that, you're right, will scramble the industry, and it will be a weird adjustment phase. But like whatever comes out the other end will be very interesting to watch.
True. And I think, to add to that, totally agree. And to add to that, I think the biggest behavioral change is not going to be about the mass, but about the volume and the shape, right? What can you do if the volume and the shape of the satellite is not that big of a constraint? Because I remember when SpaceX posted this, or Elon Musk himself posted that small picture of the Starlink stack, I couldn't sleep the entire night. It just blew my mind. How can you go from, the like rectangular shape or whatever, like cubic shape, just flat shape like that? How could what the heck? Like, it's never been done before. Like,
yeah, you watch the other constellation companies and the way they stack their satellites, and then SpaceX spins up an upper stage and flings 60 satellites off, and you're like, okay, that's totally different. And to their credit, they bought Swarm within the last year, and Swarm's a company that was taking obviously much smaller scale, right? They're doing the quarter cube sets, but that was a similar thing where it was a completely different way of thinking about the volume of what you're given on any given launch.
Yeah, that's true. So imagine what would happen with the volume that Starship is proposing at the price point that the people think they would propose to the industry. I think just, again, a lot of space applications could be, and the business model applications could be unlocked just because of Starship. And I think like the entire industry would be shaken in the next couple of years because of that.
The one thing that I'm hedging against is that it requires a second competitor to put pressure on SpaceX, right? Because right now, in terms of launch costs on the scale that they operate in Falcon 9, they have the run of the place because they can undercut everyone and still make good margins, but that's still a $55 million launch or whatever it is.
Yeah.
On the smaller satellite side of things, there's a different race going on with the new small sat competitors. So does SpaceX see those as the competitors that are putting pressure on them? I'm not quite sure yet. I still feel like they need some downward pressure on them to, actually cut their cost as low as they have promoted so far. So I'm hedging a little bit from my perspective on exactly what that initial price would be for the first couple Starship launches, but we'll see exactly how, we've already started to see some from Rocket Lab. Neutron's a new concept that they're putting out there that is, targeted at where the industry is going to be in 5 or 10 years. Relativity has some interesting ideas as well in terms of launch. So I'm keeping my eye on who is that other competitor that's going to put the pressure on SpaceX to, fulfill that 6-digit cost to launch Starship to orbit.
I'm completely with you on the thought that you shared in one of the previous episodes where you said, I think you were talking about the Blue Origin, that we all wish that Blue Origin would just drop New Glenn and just go, do something else. And and I think that's the message I want to convey to all other launch providers, like all other 130 that are there. Just drop a rocket, do something else. Consider done. Like, consider that access to space, going orbital is solved. The problem has been solved already. What would you put the resources to if you know that that problem is already solved, right? So
Great advice. And for any of those people that have those ideas, preciouspayload.com. Is there anything else that you want to send people if they're interested in learning more about the particular products you're offering?
No, that's it. Everything is on the webpage. It grows every week. We put something else there. We recently introduced the change log to the products that's being posted there every 2 weeks. And by the way, we run the weekly newsletter that is curated newsletter just on satellites, access to space, and rockets. It has now over 7,000 subscribers and growing every week. So you can find it also on preciouspayload.com.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Andrew, and I hope to chat sometime, maybe in real life at a conference or something, now that things are drifting their way back to normal. It'd be cool to hang out sometime.